Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited for today's episode of the Rush Hour Podcast, Driving with Dave. We have a very special guest. She's a mother, and she's running for State House of Representatives here in Tennessee. It's Allie Phillips. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How was the drive up here?
It was lovely.
So
I've got a young baby.
Oh.
I've got a 15-week-old.
Oh my gosh.
And I normally am up at sunrise with him. And he bestowed us the gift last night of letting us sleep in.
Oh, that is nice. At 15 weeks?
At 15 weeks. So we got up in the middle of the night, but he let us sleep in after that, morning. Usually in the morning, he's up, and my wife got him back to sleep. And I was like, thank you so much, August. We appreciate that. So I'm fresh and bushy-tailed for you.
I love that.
Your story has picked up, I think, national attention, right? Can you walk us through why you're running for House of Representatives here in Tennessee?
Yeah, so my story actually not only has national, but also has international attention. At the very early stages, I did interviews for articles out in Germany, Switzerland, Sweden. I've done interviews for a few different out of U.S. countries. What got me into running for office is I'm 29 years old. And was not really politically involved other than I would go vote. I did my due diligence, I would go vote in presidential elections, and that was about it. Last year, I was 19 weeks pregnant and went to my anatomy scan. Now, this was a planned for and wanted pregnancy with my husband. And we found out at the anatomy scan that pretty much everything that could be wrong was wrong.
Which is so horrifying, because that's kind of the final measure everything, you're good to go, babes.
Right.
Kind of that's it. Right? That's the big moment.
So there was nothing leading up to that point to give any concern. So it was me, my husband, and she was then 5, my 5-year-old daughter, Adlie. We went to that appointment together because we wanted it to be a family thing. Adlie wanted to see the baby. She wanted to see her little sister. And so what was supposed to be a happy family the baby trip turned into a devastating, oh my God, this is not good trip.
And you've got some, the technician, they're kind of doing the ultrasound. At what point do they tell you this is an issue?
So I would say we were maybe 5 minutes into the ultrasound and she stopped. And I've only had one pregnancy and one baby, and so it's been a while since I had an ultrasound, and I was in my mind, I was I thought these lasted longer. They did measurements of the body parts.
You're looking at them trying to get any read from them, right? You're just making sure that there's ears, and you're, it's such a hopeful optimism.
And so I was pointing things out. I was oh, look, she's moving. And the tech was yeah, she is. And then after about 5 minutes, she stopped and she said, I'm going to have to go grab your doctor. We've seen some pretty serious things.
Oh, boy.
And I was what do you mean by serious? She was just I will just need to go get your doctor. And so as soon as she stepped out of the room, immediately my hands were sweating, my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I'm immediately what is she gonna say? What's going on?
You're in a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. It was maybe 2 minutes, but it felt forever waiting for my doctor to come into the room. And so my doctor comes in the room and doesn't even say hi to me, just immediately comes in and starts, I just looked over your scan, and there are some anomalies that we found. Both of her kidneys have formed abnormally and are not functioning. She's measuring 4 weeks behind, so she was only 15 weeks, and there was no amniotic fluid surrounding her. And I'm sure, as you know, since you have a new baby, amniotic fluid is vital in development of a fetus. They need that fluid. And she said there was other concerns, but they didn't want to speak on it until I went and had additional scans done. And so they sent me over to a high-risk specialist later that week. I was able to get in. And the car washes, I don't miss that. I did that as a cheerleader. But so I got to high-risk doctor and went the same thing. Went in, did the anatomy scan. This one they did take their time with, and then the technician was okay, I need to go grab the doctor. And that was just kind of a PTSD moment all over again. I was oh God.
And how long was it between the first scan and this one?
4 days.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it happened very quick.
But still, those 4 days, you're...
Oh, I Googled everything.
Oh,
I was Googling, fetal, kidney development in a fetus. And so, I self-diagnosed Miley. So her name was going to be Miley. I self-diagnosed her with renal agenesis. And I was like, okay, so like, it's not completely unfixable. Like, they can inject fluid for amniotic fluid. They can inflate the kidneys.
Right,
like,
you start piecing together everything that can go right from this point forward.
Yes. And so, like, I told Brian on the way to the high-risk appointment, I was like, listen, I did research. If they say it's renal agenesis, like, don't freak out. Like, there are things that we can do, right? And so he was just like, okay, well, I'm trying not to, like, get my hopes up or be, disappointed in either way. He's like, I'm just kind of neutral right now. I was like, I get it. So we go in and she does the scan. She goes and grabs my doctor, the high-risk doctor. The high-risk doctor comes in. First question she asks me is how my first pregnancy was. I was like, completely normal, completely fine, no issues. Labor and delivery was fine. My daughter, Adlie, came out fine. And she was like, okay, so this is what we're looking at. And instead of just saying what they saw, she had the ultrasound tech put the wand back over my uterus so I could see what she was talking about. And so the first thing she did is confirmed what my OB said. She was like, both of her kidneys have formed abnormally and they're not functioning. Along with that, her stomach and her bladder also did not form correctly and are not functioning. She is measuring a month behind. There is no amniotic fluid. Her heart, they could only find 2 working chambers when there should be 4. And they couldn't find any lung development at all, which makes sense because if there's no fluid, she's not inhaling fluid to create the lungs. And then I think the hardest diagnosis was, now mind you, while she's saying all of this, like in my head, I'm like, okay, well, she can live without a kidney. We can get additional kidney transplant. Like we can tube feed her.
Sure.
Maybe like, I'm like going through all of these things. Like, how can we fix this? Like there's organ transplants that we can do. She said no lungs. And then that was just for me, like, oh God, like, I don't know how we can fix that.
So you're kind of working your way from that hopeful optimism to fatality.
With each passing anomaly that she points out, like my hope that Miley could live just kind of disintegrated little by little. And when she was done talking about her heart, the technician moved up to where we could see Miley's face and her skull, and the doctor was like, and so here we're looking at her brain. And as soon as she said brain, I was like, it's done. And so her brain, the anomaly with her brain was it didn't split all the way down the middle. You're supposed to have 2 sides of your brain. Miley's didn't split all the way. And so that's diagnosed as semi-lobar holoprosencephaly, which is a very rare diagnosis. And when diagnosed with just that, only 3% of fetuses can survive to birth. And if they do, they pass within the first 6 months to a year of their life.
Not to mention all the other issues.
And
sorry.
No, you're fine. But so with everything else combined, she said that she was incompatible with life. And she was like, in and out of the womb. Like the likeliness of her surviving to birth is very slim.
So on the most, with the most longevity, your option would be delivering the baby, then hospice until the baby passes.
Right. So, first question I thought to ask was, so what do we do now?
Right.
And she said, well, you have 2 options. You can continue your pregnancy, but you are at a greater risk of miscarriage, a stillbirth, or if she were to survive birth, we would have hospice care set up for her immediately after for her to pass. No lung development. She's not going to live very long. She said, your second option is to terminate the pregnancy, but due to Tennessee's ban on abortion, you can't do that here. You'd have to look out of state, and I can't help you with that. Like, I can't help you find those resources.
And this is just months after the Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yeah, so Roe v. Wade, so we are actually approaching today, August 25th is the 2-year anniversary of Tennessee's trigger ban. So today, 2 years ago, Tennessee's abortion ban went into effect.
And what is a trigger ban? That means as soon as it was overturned, they were ready to go with the paperwork?
The law was already ready to go, but they needed the Supreme Court to rule that it goes back to the states, and then they were able to put it into place.
And Tennessee is a supermajority red state, which means House, Senate, everything here is kind of Republican.
Yes, ran by the Republican Party.
Which, has in the past synonymously been a pro-life. And by and again, I think the Republicans have won the messaging on pro-life versus pro-choice, because who doesn't want life? We all want life, right? The problem is that these complicated conversations get whittled into a binary of whether or not someone's going to have an abortion. I've got a lot of family that, without listening to your story, would say she should have to deliver that baby, which is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's cruel. Yeah.
And so for me, it's not pro-life, it's forced birth.
Yes.
And because I'm pro-life for women, I'm pro-life for kids, and it's weird for me to be a party that screams pro-life but yet does nothing about the gun violence in our state and our country. Like, we have kids being slaughtered at school. You can't go to church going hungry. Like, this is the same party that votes against keeping these government programs in place like WIC, and voting against universal pre-K, not doing anything to help the formula shortage. Like, this is the same party that has done nothing to help families with kids, but wants to force families to have kids.
You know, I've heard you talk about the formula shortage, and when I lived in Los Angeles, you would see the formula would all be behind locked doors.
Yep.
I think it should be subsidized nationally and be completely free.
Yeah.
Because no adult is eating formula. The only reason why it exists on the black market is because it's so expensive. It should be something that you just get if you need it.
Right.
And like a book at the library, you take it out. You need formula, you get it.
Right.
It's what a non-negotiable.
Right.
In what's supposed to be the richest country in the world. Yeah, locked up, and there should be no market for formula outside of moms who need it. And I was raised by a single mom, and she had government assistance, and I'm a big advocate for a social welfare program to help people, and that help, like you said, doesn't end at childbirth. That's where it should begin, and we should, one of the leading causes of death for pregnant women is sepsis, which can come from, having a C-section and just normal procedures that go sideways, but it can also come from not being able to abort a non-viable fetus.
Right.
So you had to get out of the state.
Yes.
And where do we go from there?
So we weighed our options, and really the pros and the cons. It was, I stay pregnant, put my life at risk, knowing Miley's not going to make it, and potentially losing my life too in the process, and leaving Adlie here without her mom. And that wasn't the acceptable choice for me. So ultimately we had to make the hard decision to terminate. And so I had to spend time calling different states. I called multiple clinics in about 5 different states. And when people like online, or especially like, oh, you didn't have to go to New York, you could have went to a clinic in Illinois, it's a lot closer. And I'm like, you're right, I could have. But the problem with these clinics that are close to abortion ban states is they are so overbooked. One of the clinics I called, there was a 2.5 month wait list.
Wow. I never thought of that aspect of the supply and demand.
Yeah, people don't think about it. And that's the reality. And so, like, I didn't know if I had 24 hours before Miley, passed and I was at risk of going septic. I definitely didn't want to wait 2.5 months.
So this is a challenge for you, somebody who can afford, even though it would probably be tough on the budget, versus somebody who can't even buy a bus ticket. I mean, how many people out there can't even get to another state? They're kind of like imprisoned by the choices.
I'll tell you, I can't. My husband and I were paycheck to paycheck, and at that point we had just bought a house 4 months prior. So we were not in a position to be taking a random trip out of state.
Right.
I grew up in a small town, Ashland City. My family never had money, very much lower to middle class. We get by. We live within our means. And so on top of having to find a clinic that can get you in soon, you're having to find a clinic that's affordable. And at this point, I'm 20 weeks pregnant, and a 20-week abortion isn't cheap. You're looking at over $1,000, $2,000 just for the procedure.
And you had to do it alone.
And I had to go alone. I was fortunate enough, I found a clinic in New York City that could get me in the following week. It was the soonest I could get in at any of the clinics I called. And they happened to be the cheapest. It was $1,100 for a 20-week abortion. But add in airfare to and from and a 3-night stay in New York City, and it was coming out closer to $5,000 total.
To do what should be a constitutional right, which is take care of your health.
To do what would have been completely free in the state of Tennessee because I have state insurance. Completely free. That procedure would have been here. But I had to start a GoFundMe online. I shared my story on TikTok and asked people, like, I need help. And thankfully, I had a platform already that they were able to help. And so it's because of complete strangers on the internet, I was able to get the healthcare I needed.
So tell me about that. Tell me about your sharing your message on TikTok. Was it hard to ask for that help? Was it hard to share the story as you were grieving?
You know, I always, my parents raised me to never ask for handouts. They're like, if you want something, you work for it. You don't ask for handouts. And so that's been like engraved into my brain. So we were looking at taking out loans to go to New York to get this procedure. My mom was looking at how much money she had in her savings to help me. And we didn't have enough. We didn't qualify for enough money with a loan. And so my mom was like, honey, you're going to have to bite the bullet and ask for help. Like, people online want to help you, let them help you.
And by the way, I think parents mean well, but I think our generation, you're a little younger, but our parents, there is a lot of financial shame. There's like, grit your teeth, don't ask your coworkers how much they make. And it's like,
right.
I employ the law of divine compensation from Marianne Williamson, which is like, let the abundance flow and share your story. So I'm so glad that you did. We wouldn't be here today if you hadn't.
Well, absolutely. And so I'll tell you, even as a candidate, I still don't like asking people for money. Like, I have to ask people for money, like donations and stuff, and I absolutely can't stand it. But
Allie, ALLIE 4TN.com. She has a donation tab. We'll post a link and we will make sure you get some donations.
Well, thank you. But so it was hard. Now, it wasn't hard for me to make the video. It was hard for me to make the ask. I posted like a screenshot of the GoFundMe. I was like, this is there if you want to help me. But then I kind of like, but you don't have to, just, and I go back and forth, but there's enough humanity and kindness in the world that people didn't even think twice. And not only did people donate and exceed the amount that I needed, but people were messaging me and they were like, hey, I have an apartment in this area, or I have a friend that lives here that's willing to, let you stay in their guest room or whatever it may be. They're like, we want to help you, whatever it takes. And so I found the clinic in New York, and there's a Instagram page titled "A Girl Has No President." And they had shared my story on their page, and somebody had reached out to them, and then they connected me with them. It was a woman named Jess, a woman named Jess in Brooklyn. And she said that she saw my story and that she wants to help, and she wanted to pay for my flight. I had already paid for the flight. My mom paid for it. And it was like the cheap one that you can't refund. And I was like, well, it's already paid for and we can't get it back. So like, I appreciate that. And she's like, well, I still want to help you. And so she and I made plans that when I got to the airport, she picked me and my husband up from the airport, drove us to an apartment of a friend that she had that was staying in Florida for the week.
By the way, picking someone up from the airport in any city sucks. New York, this is a Mother Teresa moment for her to help you. It's easy to be like, I'll buy you an Uber, but it's like to do this is like really how generous.
Yeah, she drove an hour. It took her an hour to get from her home to LaGuardia. And so then she drove us into Manhattan, Southern Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, however you call it. And she not only did, when we got there, she brought a duffel bag full of like thick coats because it was early March in New York City. The wind will cut through your bones. It is freezing up there. And so she had this bag of like big winter coats, earmuffs, gloves, scarves. She had like a pack of water there, and she was like, do you guys need food? And I was like, oh, that's okay. Like we can get stuff. She's like, anything you need, you tell me.
Wow.
And she left. And so this apartment is one of those studio apartments, right? It's like maybe 300 square feet.
Lived there, I get it. Yeah, shower in the kitchen.
Yes.
Did it have a shower in the kitchen? That's how you know.
Like the full-size fridge is like one of those like little mini fridges that we have here, right?
When you live in New York, you don't buy a carton of eggs. You get the 6-pack.
Right.
You can't afford them in the fridge.
I was like, what is this? I was like, I wonder how much this place actually is monthly, because that's ridiculous.
Like $4,500.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me want to vomit. And then she left, and I was just looking around at stuff, and there was this little like bookshelf that was there, and there was this Tiffany, like little Tiffany bag, Tiffany & Co. And there was a letter sitting in front of it that had my name on it. And I open it, and it's from her, Jess, and it had a letter inside that said, I know this trip is laced in trauma, but I wanted to give you a friendly reminder that there are people out here that care about you. And inside the Tiffany box was this necklace that has an M engraved on it for Miley. And I've worn it every day since, because it was just the pure kindness. She didn't have to do that. She didn't have to pick us up. She didn't have to, pack me a duffel bag. But she did because, and mind you, she was 8 months pregnant.
Wow.
She gave birth 2 weeks after I left. And so she sends me pictures of her son. He's over a year old now. But, this woman went out of her way for a complete stranger. And she didn't have to. And so if it wasn't for her, I don't know what my trip would have looked like. But she made it so much easier. But
it must make it very interesting when you hear people talk about pro-life people will use states like New York as they're having abortions after the delivery, which would be murder. That doesn't happen. But they say these crazy things, and it really comes down to the idea that it's people will make the best choice they can for themselves, and doctors as well take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm.
Right.
So doctors are already, people that spend years in medical school and trying to do their best. Why should politicians be the ones that get to decide folks like you and the path that you have to take, which is already excruciatingly painful?
I think the short answer in that is that they shouldn't. They shouldn't get to decide. There should be no laws limiting healthcare access in any capacity for any group of people. This is a law that literally only affects a certain group of people in this country. It doesn't affect the men. Like you guys, You're not getting pregnant. You don't need that healthcare. But in reality, it does affect you. You get that, you have the side effects of it because you have a wife or you have a daughter or you have a sister.
Oh, yeah, the trauma that's involved.
Right.
For sure.
So when men are like, oh, well, why do I have an opinion? I'm not the one that can get pregnant. I'm like, well, do you know somebody that can? Do you care about somebody that can? Then you have an opinion. And we need men to stand up with women so our voices are more powerful because as women, we've had to fight for everything that we have. We had to fight for our right to vote. We had to fight to be able to buy a house, to open a bank account.
Exactly.
To just, exist in this society without being looked down upon. But we still have these lawmakers, these politicians that want us to be back in the old days where women cook and clean and take care of the kids and don't talk unless spoken to.
This wasn't on the bill 4 years ago. This, no one thought Roe v. Wade was going to be challenged in the way it was. And it has taken us back a long time. I hate that a lot of men, and maybe women, but a lot of men won't have empathy unless something affects them personally. Take Dick Cheney, for example. He, not until after his vice president term, became, pro-gay marriage, but it took his daughter being a lesbian for him to see that they share love, and it means as much as a heterosexual relationship. It sucks that people would have to rack up hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt to realize we live in a broken system, and it sucks that folks like you would have to go through what you have gone through in order to know that your voice needs to be one that will change a system that's currently not in support of you. So at what point did it dawn on you, you have to be the change?
I would say after I got to the clinic, I had to go to the clinic alone because it's a patient-only clinic. A midterm abortion is a 2-day thing because it's a surgical abortion. So you go in the first day, do all your pre-op testing, and then you go back the second day for the procedure.
And were there any protesters when you went in?
No, thankfully.
This would have happened in Missouri, right? This would have happened somewhere.
Yeah, so specifically abortion clinics, especially in New York City, this one in particular was on the 6th floor of a skyscraper. And so there's security at the elevators in the lobby. They won't let you onto the 6th floor unless you're on the list of patients that day, and security has the list.
Because you've got these other states where you've got people protesting in lab coats that are not doctors.
No.
They might have got some honorary doctorate from some DeVry University, and they put a lab coat on and hold up these graphic posters vilifying people like you who are already dealing with the worst trauma you could experience.
I think with people like that, really I ask, do you have nothing better to do? But also they're screaming at somebody that they have no idea what situation they're going through.
I believe they think they're saving lives.
They think they are.
And it's just, I think it's a lack of education about what a greater issue is, which is most pregnancies people want. 60+% of pregnancies are medical abortions, which means an abortion pill, which happened very early on.
Yes.
And most other pregnancies that are late term abortions are because of severe medical issues like yours. And there are hospitals that are Christian financed. There's Catholic hospitals where you can't get a vasectomy and you for sure can't get an abortion. And what are we doing that religious groups are funding medical procedures or lack thereof very like eye-opening for a lot of people. And I think you're really, and like that's the reason why I wanted to come out here, because your story is gonna blow up more than it already has. And it's sad that you've had to kind of be the lead blocker there.
You know, it's been hard. You know, I tell people I haven't really had a chance to grieve. After I got to the clinic, I was just doing my regular like pre-op testing, doing blood work and all of that. And then they do an ultrasound to see how big the fetus is. And in that ultrasound, I found out that Miley was already gone. Her heartbeat was not there. She wasn't moving.
Did that help you feel any more relieved about your decision?
I will say in the moment, I was broken. You know, I didn't want to lose Miley either way. Like, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to have to get an abortion. I wanted her to be okay. And hearing that she was already gone and I had no idea, it was the reality that set in that there was no saving her. My doctors were right. She wasn't going to make it. And I think what hurt me the most is that I was there alone. I had to call my husband and tell him over the phone that she was gone. And I called my mom. And at the time, I didn't really grasp what she said to me. But I do now. I understand now. When I called her and told her Miley was gone, you know, she apologized. She said she's sorry. She said, but you know what, honey? I think that's the best thing Miley could have done for you. That's the best gift she could have gave you, because you went to New York with so much guilt, so much what if my doctors are wrong? What if she could be okay? And Miley took all of that from you. She went on her own. And that was hard. Shit, that shit makes me want to cry again.
I can understand to the point where I've never had to go through anything like that, and not to, you know, my dog passed away, and he was dying, and we called the vet. We said we got to put him down, and they were like, "Wow, we can be there in 6 hours." So we're gonna do a mobile setup, and he passed before then, and it does give you like it closes any gaps that would have existed about, you know, what about the 1 in a million? Because, you know, on the internet you hear stories. No, people said, you know, because that's a lot of pro-life people say, no, you know, they told us we needed an abortion, we did it, look, everyone's healthy. It's like like that's not. We're talking about doctors with high-tech, you know, devices that are telling you that your baby's not going to make it.
Right.
And it's you know, that's who I say, you know, you listen to, not some guy who is essentially virtue signaling, because a lot of pro-life people are virtue signaling. You know, a lot of people I talk to that say they're pro-life, by the time I'm done talking to them, it turns out they're pro-choice. They just say, well, I just wouldn't do it myself. Right. But if you want to do it, and you go, then that means you're pro-choice, you moron.
Right. You could be pro-life for yourself. But
60+% people are pro-choice when it comes down to it. They just go, well, but not for me. And I go, that's not your...
But, you know, and that's so easy to say, though. It's like, I never would have thought, in my own personal capacity, I never would have gotten an abortion for, like, any reason. And that's so small-minded to think that, because I never know what could happen to me. Like, I could be SA'd. You know, I could have fetal anomalies that's putting my life at risk. And so for me, I was like, oh yeah, I would never terminate a pregnancy until I was faced with a life or death situation. And I had to make that decision. So it's really easy to say, I would never get an abortion. That's so easy to say until you get pregnant and find out that your baby's dying and it's putting your life at risk.
And I think people that aren't willing or don't have the time or bandwidth, like, not everyone's really political, not everyone tunes into the news and checks both sides of the sources, and, you know, and a lot of people just go, no, I wouldn't do it, and it requires, unfortunately, conversations like this that might be very hard for you to have, to hear the stories that we're fighting for. So how tough has it been through the campaigning process to know that you're campaigning on a major issue that has happened so closely to you? And like to have to continue to speak about that.
You know, I'll say the doors that I knock and the people I talk to, they're very receptive to my story. I would say 99.9% of people that I tell my story to, they're like, oh my God, like, I'm so sorry. You should have been able to get the care you needed. I'm like, you're right, I should have, but I couldn't. And that's the problem. There's that 0.1% where people are like, I just don't think killing a baby for any reason is valid. And I'm like, well, that's because you're giving fetal personhood more weight than an actual human being. And that's a whole different conversation. But when I tell my story to people, it hits home, because I'm not the only one. Like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women will have an abortion by the time they're 45 years old. It's just going to happen. And there are women that you know that have had an abortion that you have no idea that have had an abortion, because it's just not talked about. right? This is personal medical information, and it's just not something that we like to wave a flag and be like, yeah, I had an abortion. Like, it's not something to be proud of because it's a very hard decision. And so when talking to people, I do have some people where I meet them at the door and they're like, I just don't think people should be able to just go do it for birth control. And I'm like, that's just a very gross way to look at it.
Because that is rare, and that's usually based on,
I would say failed contraceptives. And also a lot of people that come from low-income communities aren't educated and don't know they don't have access to, what's wild is a lot of pro-life people, it's like, if you really want to be pro-life, you would want to support contraceptives. And a lot of pro-life, like the extremists, which, by the way, all the politicians know the pro-life, pro-choice debate is a losing debate. There has not really been an election won for people that are pro-life when it's on the ballot since Roe v. Wade was overturned. I feel as if there was a lot of either independents or moderate Republican women that have said, no, come on, you're not messing with our bodies this way. Especially when they start getting into IVF and birth control and things like that. They're like, oh, no. Because what we tried to say at the beginning when they were looking at overturning Roe is that they weren't going to stop at abortions. They were going to go after things like IVF and birth control and like IUDs, and they have. And so you can't argue pro-life and that you want to stop abortions from happening, but you also want to get rid of the things that would keep unwanted pregnancies from occurring, and then also limit IVF, which is a process in which families that truly desperately want babies are paying a crap ton of money just to have that baby because it's not God's will. It's their thing is like, oh, we don't like that because they discard, the embryos that they're not using.
I hate that term because it's like, well, if God created men in his image and men learned how to do IVF, men, women, if medicine learned how to overcome these issues, then it should be embraced.
Right.
So at what point did you decide, all right, I'm running for office? And were you like, oh my gosh, did you have what's it called, the syndrome where imposter syndrome? Like what was that feeling like?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
So after going through what I went through in New York, it was a very isolating and dehumanizing experience. Not the abortion itself, just the process of me having to be alone and going through that in a foreign city. Once I was back home, I was reached out to by the Center for Reproductive Rights. And they asked me if I wanted to join the lawsuit with them to sue Tennessee, and I said yes quicker than I bought Eras Tour tickets. Like, it was a no-brainer for me. I was like, okay, well, this is how I'm going to make a difference, because I knew once I went through what I went through that I have a little girl at home, and I'd be damned if I'm not going to sit back. Like, if I sit back and not fight for her to have a freedom in her state to have reproductive health care or just access to reproductive care. And so joining the lawsuit was like, okay, that's my first step. But then I was like, you know what? Lawsuits can take years.
And by the way, did they find that because of your TikTok?
Yes, they saw my video on TikTok.
And your videos are probably immediately getting a lot of engagement due to how sad it is. And I think people are surprised. They're surprised that you had to do that. They go, oh, wow, this is what's happening. This is what the law cost.
Right. And a lot of people are stunned by it, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is actually happening. And I'm like, it is. And that's the problem. That's why people need to pay attention. But so after joining that, I was like, okay, I need to do something else. And so I had the idea of writing a bill and proposing it to the legislature, something I was going to call Miley's Law. And essentially what that would do is give exceptions for fetal anomalies. And if fetal anomalies is too broad for them, I was going to go for fatal fetal anomalies. So pretty much incompatible fetuses, like not going to make it to term. And I was like, there's no reason to argue that, right? If it's not going to make it, it's not going to make it.
Yeah, it solves whatever that pro-life point is.
Right. Because at this point, we're still like just life of the mother exception, but they can't even explain or go into detail on what life of the mother is, because my life was at risk staying pregnant, but I still didn't qualify for the ban, for the exception.
Right. They don't trust in the doctor's opinions.
Right.
And then they don't even have a strong opinion themselves.
Right.
So it's like, I think a lot of pro-life people, they go, well, at what week should be the week? So if they're 16 weeks, but not, and it gets into like sort of a semantic argument over like what should be the legal week. And, and I think most people already had it agreed on, probably somewhere in the 16 week, whatever, there's range where like, okay, if you haven't made your decision now, then maybe, maybe there's a different path.
But see, even that's not good because you can't even have an anatomy scan until at least 18 weeks.
Exactly.
So a cutoff at 15, 16 weeks, they think they're being generous. I'm like, well, you cut it off then, and then 3 weeks later, a woman goes in and finds out that the fetus is missing its entire skull.
And you know what would solve this is a little bit of taxpayer funding to get maybe a judicial system that works with medicine. Just to say, all right, this is clearly a case, check. So it's like maybe and again, I'm looking for ways to say, okay, make abortion legal again, but solve some of these sort of outlier scenarios that people have. Like in your case, it'd be like very obvious. Okay, this isn't a healthy baby, but if it's post 20 weeks in a healthy baby, okay, like let's go another route. Like find some middle ground, but like there's not even that conversation.
A big thing down here in the South, like you said earlier, is a lack of education. Growing up in small town Ashland City, our like family planning, our like health class, we didn't learn about sex ed. We didn't learn about how to have safe sex and how to avoid STDs and pregnancy and all that. It was just abstinence. Don't have sex. You'll like blow up if you do. Like that was all it was. And so we really do have a lack of education, especially here in the South. Like we have, I think Tennessee, based off of last year, we were like in 7th for teen pregnancy in the state. So like we have girls walking around pregnant as teenagers because there's a lack of education. There's a lack of resources.
Yeah, like my wife and I, she'd be considered geriatric. I'm 39, she's 37. We waited until we could afford to bring a baby into this world because we were educated on knowing like, all right, we're not ready yet. But in some cases, what's the better scenario? Raising a kid when you have the bandwidth and you're ready, or being forced into a situation that could have been prevented by taking a pill or something.
Right.
When you find out, not at 4 weeks when you don't even know you're pregnant or whatever, but giving the mom the time to figure it out and do the safe thing. So yeah, I mean, so you got this bill. Sorry,
no, you're good.
So you got this bill.
So I had the idea for the bill, and so I set up a meeting with my representative, who is now my opponent, and I met with him at the library, and we met for 2 hours. I told him my story. I told him about Miley's Law, and I asked for his help because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get this to anybody. And he said the person I needed to talk to was the Attorney General. He was like, that's the man you need to talk to. And I was like, okay, well, can you help me get to him? And he was like, yeah, sure, I'll help you. And so he said he would help me set up an appointment with the AG. And for the weeks following, I kept messaging him like, hey, just want to see where we're at. And he was like, oh, I'm still waiting to hear back. Or, oh, I got this, I need to look it over. He sent something back. And so it was just kind of like beating around the bush for a couple weeks. And then eventually he just stopped responding to me altogether.
Jeez.
Yeah. And mind you, in this meeting with him, I told him my story, told him what I wanted to see done with Miley's Law. And I learned very, very quickly, something I already knew, but how uneducated the men in our house, or just in politics in general, truly are when it comes to women's health care. He was really confused when I told him that I had a daughter and I lost this pregnancy. He said, and I quote, maybe I'm just a guy, but I always thought it was the first pregnancies that went bad.
Jeez.
And I was like, they can, but any pregnancy can go bad. And I was like, and you're voting on women's health care and our right to health care.
Oh my gosh.
When you don't know that any pregnancy can go bad. Not only that, he has a daughter. He has an adopted daughter who's not much younger than me. And so I tried to like humanize my story with him. I was like, put my story on your daughter. If your daughter called you and said, Dad, everything's wrong, baby's not going to make it, what advice would you give her? And he said, well, you're not going to like my answer. I was like, I want to hear it. And he said, well, the way I grew up is I would tell her I think she should continue the pregnancy. I was like, even if it's putting her life at risk. And he said, that's just how I grew up. And I said, and would you disown her if she went and had an abortion? And he said, I wouldn't be happy with her. And for me, I'm like, if this man can't even respect and support his own child in getting life-saving health care, then how is he supposed to legislate and support his constituents?
Yeah, like what are you supposed to do? You get like anyone who's listening, we're 35 minutes in, anyone who's listening to this conversation that's reasonable hears how reasonable your story is, all of that. You're not going to get him. You're not going to get him at that point.
No. It blew my mind. But So after talking to him, I was like, this man clearly doesn't care about the people, especially women. And that's unacceptable for me. So I started thinking about it. My mom brought it to my attention. She was like, why don't you run against him? And I'm like, God, why would I do that? Like, who runs for office?
Moms, they always get you into some pickles.
I know. I was like, why would I do that? And she was like, well, why not? And I'm like, I don't know anything. Like, I'm not qualified to be a representative. She was like, you think half the people down there are?
Right.
And I was like, that's fair.
They put on a tie. They're like, oh, maybe I'm just a guy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. But then like my friends started mentioning it, and then some of the people at the Montgomery County Democratic Party started mentioning it. And so I started like doing research. I started talking to other representatives, current and past reps, different levels of public office. So like school board members, city council members. And so I weighed the pros and the cons. And for me, there were a lot more cons than there were pros. I don't have the money to run. I don't have the time to run. I've never run for office before. What's the likelihood that I would even have a chance of winning? But I looked at the bigger picture. For me, I was like, this is more than just me. And if I can put my life on hold for a year to make a greater difference for the rest of the state and potentially the country, then it's worth every bit of it. And so I would say after hearing story after story coming out of Florida, coming out of Texas, the 10-year-old in Ohio that had to go across state lines, that was just kind of the solid, I'm doing this. And I announced my campaign on October 2nd last year. And I haven't looked back.
I was going to say, how's it going? We're 75 days, whatever, to the election. How's it going?
Are we down to the hours and minutes?
We are down to it.
It's been going really well. I've had a lot of really good feedback. I have a lot of support. The only hurdle I'm facing is my opponent. I don't know if you saw those Jeff Burkhart signs we were passing, those red and blue. That's my opponent. He has name recognition here. He's served on city council for 12 years. He ran for mayor twice and lost. He ran for Senate and lost. And he's the current incumbent. So he has the name recognition, whereas I'm coming out of completely nowhere.
And there's probably like no polling going on, right, for an election of this size?
There will be polling next month. I don't know if it's the beginning or the end of next month, but there will be polling. My district specifically is the second most flippable in the state. Like, it leans 3 points red.
Of a red state, this is a purple district. Mm-hmm. So this has blue and as well.
It has a lot. It has a good mix. But it's a 3-point lean on red. So it leans red, but not by much.
Let me ask you, you got a MAGA neighbor we drove by. What are they, have you talked to them?
Yeah. Yep.
Who are they voting for?
As far as state and local, I'm not sure. I know they're voting for Trump because they have Trump flags outside their house. But actually, if you go around this circle, there's another house that has Trump signs in their yard, but also my yard sign in their yard. Which is weird, but it is what it is. I've talked to them, and I've brought up things like my story, and they're like, well, we thought you should have been able to get healthcare. And I'm like, right, but I couldn't. I'm like, well, how do you feel about like the LGBT community? They're constantly attacking them. And they're like, we have a lot of friends in the LGBT community. I'm like, so how can you vote for, and they have little girls. I'm like, how can you vote for a man that sexualizes women, has been found guilty of sexually assaulting a woman, and just has no respect for women in general? And they like his policies over Biden. I don't know how they feel about Harris, but they didn't like Biden. But who
was a very of all Democrats, he was pretty leaning on the pro-life side. Like, he was kind of forced to be, And that's just, he's a Catholic, and and that's, my family's Catholics, and they're very pro-life. And I think like a guy like Tim Walz, who's done so much good for so many kids and so many social welfare programs. My mom and having been part of social welfare programs, they hear him pro-choice and they go, no, not going to happen. And it's like, so I think those people are a loss, but I do think there's a lot of people that are going to hear your story and be very reasonable. And I do have to get you out of here. I'm going to be so rooting for you.
Thank you.
And tell me about your district, so that if people don't live there, they might have family.
Yeah.
Clarksville, what's the district? And how can we get more people that, to push the folks in this district to check you out?
So my district is District 75. It was redrawn 2 years ago, so you have to look at the map. But I am West Montgomery County, so I cut off at like Peacher's Mill, and I'm to the west. So then I have like Woodlawn, Palmyra, a little bit at Cumberland City. I have Fort Campbell military base. And so that's my district. We have 3 districts in Montgomery County, so I'm the one on the west. If people want to come up and help door knock, that makes a difference. We do phone banking opportunities, so you can call from your house. We have postcard writing, text banking. There are ways to volunteer. Donations obviously help, and then sharing my story, sharing my platform.
You have a great manager helping you out, so people can contact you. Allie, ALLIE 4TN.com, and I'll post the links below. I'm going with politically blonde. That's what I think your slogan should be. Is politically blonde here. She's gonna be. I think you're gonna be kicking out some men. And
I've already planned my outfit for my first day on the house floor, and it's my hot pink pantsuit. And I'm ready for it. I'm ready for all the looks. I call myself Abortion Barbie because I'm going to coin that for myself before they do it. But I'm fighting for reproductive health care while also wearing like a lot of pink and a lot of glitter and friendship bracelets because I'm a Swiftie.
And thank you for this. This is staying on to your election.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it. All right, Allie Phillips, everyone. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.